No, my name's Lucas. I'm co-founder and CEO of Centrifuge. And in short, we bring real-world assets to DeFi. But today's talk is actually mostly about DeFi, not as much about real-world assets. And mostly it's about the learnings that we've gone through in the last 4 years of being involved in this space for a while and sort of iterating on our own idea, iterating with other projects. A lot in what sort of it was Ethereum space and how we can actually apply some of these learnings to make sure that as Polkadot and Kusama are about to really lift off with parachains, how we bring that ecosystem to full speed and thriving on Polkadot. I will give you a bit of background on what Centrifuge does. The simplest description is just Centrifuge allows anyone to launch an on-chain credit fund. So creating collateral-backed pools of loans against real estate, against farmland, invoices, you name it. So these new financial instruments should give people access to the liquidity that exists in DeFi and sort of allow real businesses to borrow money. So why do they want to do that, or why do we want to do it? Well, sort of there's a lot of borrowers out in the real world that are extremely put at a disadvantage in this traditional financial system that just mostly favors the very large companies, the very large players. Just as a very crazy number, and this is an example I like to give, Google is able to sell a bond at 0.5% interest rate per year. So this is their cost of capital. If you're a smaller borrower, small business, and trying to grow your own business, you're easily paying 10 to 15% per year interest. But there's no 30, but your risk of default is not 30 times more likely than Google. It's actually, your default rate is still quite low. And so where does this come from? It comes from a bunch of intermediaries that are just not really motivated or built to actually do this in an efficient way, right? And so if you look at DeFi now, DeFi was built from the very beginning and with the idea that there are no barrier of entries, there are no unnecessary intermediaries, everything is fully transparent and liquid on chain. And so it really is an ideal place to start thinking about how we can actually attack these inefficiencies that these borrowers see today. On the flip side, what does it actually bring for DeFi? Well, while DeFi has definitely been on a vertical growth curve at the moment, it's still just a fraction of what exists in the real world. So bringing these assets to DeFi will really make it scale and sort of, I think, for all of us, help us deliver on this vision of actually changing the world, not just of tech-savvy early adopters, but people who just simply want to get an education or buy a car or build a business. And so just as a number, total value locked in DeFi at the moment is around 80 billion. JP Morgan has $25 trillion in assets under custody. That's 200 times more than a single bank, one of the larger ones, but still a single bank is still several hundred times bigger than DeFi today, right? And our goal is to sort of bring all of those assets, make it available to everybody to use DeFi. And so now, talking about DeFi, if you think back about what blockchains were in 2014, you probably just thought mostly about Bitcoin and individual coins that you could move around. And so the idea was that with Ethereum, you had this computer that could execute any kind of transaction. And one of the very early Ethereum requests for comment or EIP, Ethereum Improvement Proposal, was the token standard, ERC20s, right, that are ubiquitous today. This is really what it all started with, because now you had a way to actually have multiple assets on one chain and you could start trading. Actually, in April 2017, Maker was about to launch Psi, single collateral DAI. It was backed just by ETH, and it was sort of the very first iteration. And that was a very important second step, because now you didn't just have different kinds of assets, but you had a stable currency, a currency that actually represents something that you're used to, right? Dollars, like a lot of people have dollars on their bank accounts. They have to sort of know, they know they trust it at least to some extent. So like having that on chain actually was extremely valuable to sort of start it. Then actually, way before Uniswap and AMMs were a thing, like 2017, Bancor did actually one of the largest token generation events, ICOs, at the time to create an automated market maker. And so that was another building block that was built, right? So it's now 2017, and a few years, we're in the midst of the ICO bubble, and actually now we don't just have some of the basic building blocks, but we also have actually assets that need trading, that need liquidity, meaning all those ICO projects that were launched at the time. It wasn't long after, and the first lending protocols came up. Actually, in Dharma sort of started talking about tokenized debt in 2018, where they tried to allow people to borrow MKR for ETH, or borrow Kyber for DAI. And so that sort of created another necessary component, right? Because now you could actually short something effectively, or you could margin by borrowing and lending. So then 2018 is when things, I think, really started looking much more like what they're looking like today. With the launch of Uniswap, you now were able to actually create liquidity and start a market for a token that had as small of a market cap as a few $1,000, right? At the time, gas was also cheap enough that you actually could do those experiments. Of course, today we live in a very different reality. But sort of fast forward to 2019, I think like DeFi now was sort of mostly capable of what things look like today. And we're at 327 million TVL in beginning of 2019. Maker was the Maker, Compound, Uniswap, Lightning were the four top ones. I think Aave wasn't even live yet at the time. And we had DeFi summer last year, and sort of now we're in the middle of this crazy bull run with Elon and Doge, and sort of DeFi's the killer use case, right? And I think it totally makes sense, because the one thing that blockchains allow us to do that was really, really hard before was to have a trustless transfer of value, a digital transfer of value that you could develop, you could use with code. And that's what a financial system is, where the only difference is the traditional financial system is it's not code that govern the system, but it's banks and regulators that govern it. And so Polkadot, Kusama are about to take off, and so let's see how we actually get there, right? So sort of rehashing this history of and learnings from Ethereum, I think it started with the ERC20 token, right? Because what the ERC20 token allowed us to do on Ethereum was it gave you compatibility between any project that supported it, right? Like if you think about trying to move money from your brokerage account with bank A to bank B, and then use a third service to do something else with it, it's a nightmare that involves filling out 10 different forms, waiting for a couple of weeks, and then hoping that they'll be compatible, and then doing these transfers, right? With ERC20s were able to get this compatibility from the start, right? So important component, fungible tokens. Another important thing is Rome wasn't built in a day, and you could also say it wasn't. It takes a town it takes a village to raise a child, right? And the fact was that all of these projects were sort of working together very closely and sort of built on top of each other. And at some point, we had this critical momentum to really take off. And I think that is really something that allowed us to sort of focus on what you do well and let everyone else do everything else. And that's also, and so we have these many different building blocks that work really well together that we can now use. And so how do we skip those first 5 years in Polkadot, in the Polkadot ecosystem? I think we've already gotten very far along, obviously. We have a lot of projects already working together, building on top of each other, trying to experiment. And this is really what I think will be extremely important in accelerating this and sort of maturing this ecosystem. And so I think we're off to a good start, but let's keep in mind we are sort of this interoperability, this standardization is really what will make the user experience simple, right? Another important thing about ERC20 tokens is pretty much every wallet knows how to use them. So I can send them, I can trade them, there's the same interface to do all these transactions. And really you can't do that by yourself. So what I hope as a community we can come together with is to start doing some of these things together, working with each other to allow our assets to be traded against yours, to then be leveraged again with something else and then sold for a third thing. So you get the gist. For us, actually, it already is a project of getting 5 different DeFi projects involved in what we do. We have people start by buying ETH for gas. They then mint an NFT on Centrifuge chain. They lock it up in a pool on Centrifuge, but then they borrow DAI from MakerDAO to lend against it. They take that DAI, they swap it to USDC on an AMM, or even a DEX aggregator, using like Paraswap, 1-inch curve, and then they convert that to fiat using Circle, right? And so there's along this chain going from financing a house with $100,000 and wanting to have those $100,000 in your bank account, you go through and you use these 5 different components, and in the end, as a user, you get what today a bank will do with a bunch of forms and a couple of week-long process in a few minutes with a few transactions. So this is sort of how we think, right? The blockchain multiverse will be something where we will all profit by actually collaborating. And for Centrifuge, that means that we want our assets to be able to be used as collateral, and we want people other DeFi projects to have access to these tremendous user base that is these real world assets. And I'm very happy to announce that we're actually launching with Altair on Kusama in the coming weeks, which will be our chain, our parachain on Kusama, where a lot of what I just talked about is going to be the main focus. It's going to be around collaborating with projects, establishing these standards, really innovating on how we can sort of get this system up and running, get DeFi up and running on Polkadot. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone that's building on Substrate today and testing out these topics. That was it. I hope you guys were able to learn a bit about sort of the history that we have, that maybe not all of you have been experiencing firsthand, and you sort of see what worked, what we can focus on and take some learnings from it.